to a client, when they cut, they are all shocked at how much better the performance is, and a lot of it is because of these bottom two. All of a sudden, people aren't covering, and they're saying, finally, this person's gone. It's about time. If you went...
What if you've already done that, and you've down to the bone of what you think is the core group of good performers, you know, ducks and eagles, and now you still think you've got to cut some of those because you can see cash flow issues ahead, and you know you have to take an action. It's much harder to take because those are good people, they're high performers, they're smart, and they believe in the company.
It's extremely difficult, and that becomes a difficult situation when you have to cut good people. But if it's the choice between surviving the company for everybody and having to cut good people will land. They always find they will land, and it's extremely emotional to do. But again, when you're looking at your cash flows, knowing that if I don't do something even to good people, and I've been through it with some folks saying this is our last layoff, you folks are our core people, no more layoffs. And then a month later, when jobs got pushed back and orders got canceled, he had to go back out and tell his good people, I got to lay you off. It's extremely difficult, but when, again, faced with the survival of the company, it's not a good decision, but you really have no choice. The other thing is, too, go through a list of your people in your company and put them in the classifications. Then I would challenge you and identify how many A players you think you have. I would then challenge you to go to your management team and ask them to do the same thing. Just come up with numbers. How many eagles, ducks, and turkeys do we have? And then go to your if you're a manufacturer, go to your shop supervisor and ask them to do the same thing. But you get three very different answers. I had a client that knew they had to cut. They had to change some things. I won't bore you with too many stories. The very small company, but they had 16 employees, and we said we got to cut the labor force by 25% to get the cash stabilized. We got to cut to 12. They came back and they said, you know what we're going to do? We've identified, we think we can do it with 9. We understand the concept of this, and we think we can go from 16 to 9 and still get the product out the door. We think we have that many turkeys we've taken a hard look at. We know who, and we're willing to pay those 9 people the equivalent of 12 if they can get the work out the door. If they can't, we're going to pay them like 9 people. Great. They said, we've identified 6 of the 9. We're going to go to those 6 and ask them which of the remaining people do they want to keep, because we're not sure. We think we have some people, but we're not sure which ones would be the 3. Those 6 players came back and they said, we want this one guy, and we want the guy that quit and is now working up in Dayton, and we want this other guy that quit that's working over here because the rest of them aren't. We don't have, there's not 9 here. There's not 9 eagles here. They were shocked. They ended up getting 1 back. They had to keep 1, and they were able to get out the door for the most part with 9 people. What they were doing was 16 because they boiled it down and they put the onus on those people. If you want to make more money, get it, produce. If you don't produce, you're not going to get paid. It was that simple, and your A players respond to that. I mean, they want pay for performance. Once they recognize I can make more money if I perform, and you're not going to keep people around that can't perform, let's do it. They will throw in behind you. Okay. Back to some of the analysis on direct labor. Obviously, one of the things you want to look at is utilization. How much productivity are you getting out of there, which means how much productive work per day are you getting for every hour that you pay the folks. It's a key statistic to keep track of. Efficiency. People can mark down that they're working on a job, but if there's 1,000 hours budgeted for the job and you get to the end of a job and it took you 1,200 hours to produce, you really weren't getting billable hours. So you really need to boil it down and keep an eye on, are they really being productive? Just because they're busy doesn't mean they're productive. It's a key concept, and this is where a lot of companies, specifically manufacturers and construction, fall down because it's easy on big projects and when there's a lot going on not to pay attention. And people, by human nature, if they know there's not much work coming down the pike, they will stretch it. It's human nature. It's job preservation. It's survival. So these are key things to keep an eye on. I've worked with about 100 different companies over the last 11 years working with troubled companies or companies with troubled cash flow, and that number is pretty dead on. You've got to get, for every 10 hours you pay them, you've got to get 8 billable, productive, that you can actually bill. If you're doing that, you should be hitting your stride. You get below that, get down to 2/3, now all of a sudden you're paying 3 people to do the job that really only need 2. So by keeping an eye on that and monitoring jobs, that's going to tell you a lot on day-to-day profitability. Then you've also got your cost per hour. You can work tons of hours, but if your costs are out of control, that's the other side of it. If they're working hours, again, back to the utilization, they're working hours that aren't billable, that's not really covering your costs. That's just adding to the overhead. So again, it's an easy thing if you're not paying attention to what the budget is, and you're not paying attention to managing, planning. It's all forward-looking. It's all forward-looking where we want to be. Selling and admin and indirect. I mean, you can look at a historical percent of sales, you can look at comparison to other companies, but your best evaluation is going to be the eagles, ducks, and turkeys. You fill your company with eagles and ducks, you need less people, and you will get more done. It's that simple. Material costs. This is a tough one because it can be impacted by a lot of things. I mean, you can look at your historical percent of sales, but if your sales mix has changed and your product line has changed and you're doing different things, that's not going to tell you a whole lot. You really need to look at, you need to boil it down to a more specific number. You can look at what other companies do. There's lots of data out there to compare to. But these last two, the changes in the market conditions and the changes in the pricing strategy, are absolutely key. I've got a client who's a heavy metal fabricator, and we've spent a lot of time at the end of 2008 targeting the plan for 2009, where the business is going to come from. And they identified the steel industry, the infrastructure, because of what went on in 2008, that the steel industry was buying and building and repairing and expanding. Petrochemical, which is hot because of the price of gas and the energy and the fuel, and power generation with nuclear coming up and clean coal and just the facilities needing the need for energy to be built. So they spent all this time doing this strategy of here's who we're going to call on, and this is where we're going to spend our time, and this is where the sales are going to come from. 1 month later, 3 of the major steel companies pushed $5 million, which represents a little under half their work for the year, pushed $5 million worth of projects that were on the books back from the fourth quarter of 2008 to the first quarter of 2009, and from there they've pushed it back to third, fourth, and into 2010. So basically the steel industry has sent a message right now saying we're in trouble, we're not expecting to spend a whole lot. Well, they just spent all this time with this plan and everything. They immediately needed to change to say we're throwing all of our weight behind the petrochemical. If they weren't forward-looking and constantly reviewing and watching the plan and looking at the cash, they would have just said, well, that's our plan, we're going to keep doing it. But they reacted to the market conditions. Pricing as well, looking at the margins by product line is absolutely key. You got to focus on you can't trade dollars. You got to focus on the pricings where you're making the money. In that respect, a lot of companies, and I'm guessing if I or someone asked you, why do customers come to your company? Why do they buy from you? Delivery? Service? Be right at the top of the list, hopefully. If you go to your sales force and say, why did we lose this sale? What would they say? So you bet. You got a big disconnect in your sales force is out there selling one thing, and the company's got a company motto or company mission or company philosophy that we sell price and quality. Well, that's not what the sales force is telling you. You got to mesh that together, and you've got to put that together, and if that's truly what you're selling, you've got to find those product lines, those customers, where you make the margin and tell your sales force, stop selling price, sell the quality and the service that we can deliver. It'll work. You'll get more out of less sales.